Let me be clear from the start. This is not a love story. This is a wake-up call. You see, when you've been dealing with someone avoidant, someone who runs the second things get real, who vanishes when emotions surface, who disconnects just as you're starting to open up, you start to believe it's about you. You start thinking you're too much. You're the problem. But let me break this myth right here. You are not too much. They are too afraid. So what changed? Why did the avoidant come back for me? Was it magic? No. Was it manipulation? Absolutely not. Was it me begging? Never. It was one thing, and one thing only. I stopped chasing. When I stopped over-explaining, when I stopped justifying my worth, when I finally stopped sending the just checking in messages, that sips when everything changed. You want to know what finally made the avoidant come back? It was me remembering who I am. It was me walking away with self-respect. It was me creating space for silence instead of chaos. The avoidant didn't come back because they suddenly evolved. They came back because I finally did. And when I did, they realized what they lost. Not because I made them feel guilty, but because I gave them the gift of absence. Now let me break down the 4 major shifts that triggered this entire turning point. There comes a moment in your life when the urge to defend yourself, to clarify what you meant, to justify your emotions, just dies. Not out of defeat, but out of clarity. That moment hit me like a wall. I was mid-sentence, texting out yet another long message, explaining why I felt hurt, explaining why I reacted the way I did, explaining how I wasn't trying to pressure anyone, just expressing myself, and suddenly it hit me, why am I doing this? Why am I pouring my heart out like this person is a judge, and I'm on trial for simply having emotions? It's a pattern so many of us fall into, especially when we deal with someone avoidant. We start believing we owe them a PowerPoint presentation every time we feel something. We assume that if we just word it right, if we just deliver our feelings with enough calm, clarity, and logic, maybe then they'll finally get it, maybe they'll respond, maybe they'll see us. But the truth is, people who want to understand you will, and people who don't. They'll keep pulling away no matter how soft your voice is or how careful your words are. So I did something radical. I stopped explaining, not because I was angry, not because I didn't care anymore, but because I finally realized I was explaining myself to someone who didn't have the capacity or the willingness to meet me emotionally. I had mistaken their silence for mystery when it was actually just avoidance. I had mistaken their distance for depth when it was actually just emotional unavailability, and I was overcompensating for both. I remember the exact moment I sent a message that just said, that was it. No 3-paragraph emotional essay. No clarifications. No emotional appeals. And guess what happened? Silence. No reply. And for once, it didn't wreck me. Because I understood what that silence meant. Not that I wasn't worthy, but that I wasn't being heard. That I was throwing explanations into a void and hoping for connection. But connection isn't built through performance. It's built through mutual presence. And I was the only one showing up. The more I sat with myself, the more I saw the damage that constant explaining had done. It chipped away at my self-trust. It made me question whether my feelings were valid. It trained me to overthink before speaking, to water down my truth so it wouldn't feel too much for someone who could barely handle the surface. It exhausted me, and exhaustion is the clearest sign that something needs to stop. When I stopped explaining, I started observing. I noticed the patterns. I noticed how avoidants often don't need an explanation. They need space. But more than that, they need reality. They need to feel the consequence of their avoidance. And that only happens when you stop giving them access to your emotional labor. Silence, as it turns out, is not passive. It's powerful. It's loud. It shifts dynamics. When someone who's used to your essays gets a simple one-word answer, it hits different. They notice. And if they don't, then they never valued your voice to begin with. I learned to trust my voice, not prove it. I stopped treating my boundaries like negotiations. I stopped thinking my emotions were only acceptable if they were calm and curated. Sometimes I'm loud, sometimes I cry, sometimes I need more. That's not a flaw, it's humanity. And if someone can't hold space for that without running, it's not my job to shrink to fit their limitations. In fact, not explaining became my new boundary. It wasn't about being cold or distant. It was about protecting my peace. I replaced explanations with clarity. I started saying things like, "This doesn't feel good to me," and leaving it there. No follow-up, no analysis, no begging to be understood, because if I have to beg you to care, it's already over. Ironically, the minute I pulled back all that energy and gave it back to myself, the avoidant noticed. Suddenly, I wasn't predictable. I wasn't performing. I wasn't emotionally available on demand. I became a mystery. And for someone who's used to being chased, mystery is magnetic. But let me be crystal clear. I didn't stop explaining myself to get them back. I stopped explaining to get myself back. And that was the difference. That was the turning point. That was the shift that triggered everything. When the avoidant left, my first instinct was to watch what they were doing, watch if they were online, watch if they still cared. I was addicted to checking their stories, their likes, their silence, and every time I looked and saw nothing, I collapsed inside. I kept thinking, why aren't they hurting? Why aren't they coming back? But that question kept me trapped. It pulled me further into a loop that wasn't about love anymore. It was about control, about fear, about abandonment. Then one day, I just got tired. Tired of performing. Tired of pretending to be okay. Tired of waiting for someone else's validation to tell me I mattered. That's when I made a decision. A real one. Not a dramatic crying in the bathroom kind of decision, but a quiet, deep one. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not watching them. I'm watching me. Healing is not a switch you flip. It's a discipline. It's an everyday decision to shift your attention from who left to who's still here. I had to sit with my own grief without numbing it through stalking. I had to stop checking on someone who never checked in with me. That hurt. That withdrawal was real. But little by little, I started to breathe again. I started replacing every urge to check on them with a check-in with myself. Instead of checking their story, I took a walk. Instead of reading into their silence, I read a book. Instead of trying to decode why they didn't respond, I decoded why I kept chasing someone who never answered. That's when I realized something. The avoidant didn't steal my peace. I handed it over, but now I was taking it back. I started going to the gym, not to post about it, not to show them I'm doing fine, but because moving my body helped move my emotions. I started journaling, not to vent about them, but to reconnect with myself. I asked myself hard questions. Why do I feel like I need to earn love? Why do I accept breadcrumbs and call it a meal? Why do I wait for people who don't wait for me? And the answers shook me, because they had nothing to do with the avoidant. They had everything to do with my own patterns. I realized I was recreating old wounds, trying to fix people who mirrored the ones who hurt me before. I was addicted to earning approval because I never believed I deserved it by default. And that right there, that was the real healing. Healing isn't cute. It's not a glow-up selfie with a caption about moving on. It's ugly, it's quiet, it's sitting alone on a Friday night and not texting them even though your chest is screaming. It's crying without the closure text. It's choosing to eat, sleep, move, work, live. Even when your mind is still spinning in pain, that's the work. That's where the comeback is born. You don't heal by hoping they'll return. You heal by realizing you don't need them to. The more I focused on myself, the less their absence mattered. I stopped measuring my worth by their attention. I stopped letting their silence define my narrative. Because here's the truth. Their absence wasn't punishment. It was permission. Permission to focus on me. Permission to stop proving myself. Permission to start over. And with every step I took toward my own healing, the power dynamic changed. Not because I was manipulating it, but because I was no longer available for the game. I was no longer the version of myself who chased. And when someone stops being available for dysfunction, the dysfunction starts to notice. Did they come back? Yes. But that's not the point. The point is, I didn't care the same way anymore because I had changed. I didn't want them to come back to the old me, the one who explained too much, chased too hard, waited too long. I wanted to meet someone who saw the healed version and said, I see your value, and if they couldn't, then they weren't coming back into my life at all. Healing wasn't about getting them back, it was about getting me back. And that changed everything. There's something people forget when they keep letting avoidant partners come and go, like they're using a revolving door. When you tolerate disrespect, you train people how to treat you. And I had trained them well. Every time I excused the silence, every time I explained away the ghosting, every time I responded after being ignored for days, I was sending one loud message. You can mistreat me, and I'll still be here. It didn't start that way. Of course not. It always starts soft. You give the benefit of the doubt, you're understanding, you let something slide. You tell yourself they just need time or they're scared, but eventually a line gets crossed, then another. And then one day you look around and realize you're in a situation where respect is no longer the foundation, and you're still there trying to hold it together. That's when it hit me. Avoidants thrive in relationships where consequences don't exist. As long as they can keep you in a loop of hope, they never have to change. They disappear, and you reach out. They ignore, and you justify. They come back, and you welcome them without questions. That's not connection. That's control. And it's rooted in your fear of being left, not their willingness to love you. So I made a decision. I will no longer make disrespect feel safe. I stopped responding like clockwork. I stopped softening my boundaries. I stopped acting like their return was some kind of blessing. I didn't announce it with drama. I didn't send a long final message. I just started acting like someone who respects themselves. And that alone was enough to disrupt the pattern. See, when someone who's used to getting away with things starts feeling your absence in a real way, it forces them to reflect. Not because you punished them, but because you interrupted their cycle. You shocked the system. Suddenly, they're not getting the same reaction. You're not texting paragraphs. You're not asking what went wrong. You're not begging them to talk, and that makes them uncomfortable. But here's the catch. For this to work, it has to be real. You can't pretend to have boundaries while secretly hoping they break through them. You can't post stories hoping they'll see and miss you, while pretending you've moved on. You have to actually move. You have to make peace with the fact that if someone treats you like an option, it's okay to remove yourself without giving them a final explanation. The way you teach someone to respect you is by showing them what happens when they don't, not through revenge, not through silence games, through action, through exit, through self-respect. I stopped replying to the midnight hey messages. I stopped giving them a soft place to land every time they ran and decided to crawl back. I stopped being their emotional safety net, and it wasn't easy. It hurt, because I still cared, but caring for them at the cost of disrespecting myself was no longer an option. The more I enforced those boundaries, the more obvious their patterns became. The emotional unavailability, the breadcrumbing, the false starts. It was all so clear once I stopped making excuses, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to tolerating scraps when you've tasted your own power. And what happened when I made disrespect uncomfortable? The avoidant noticed. They always do. When the door they used to walk through, whenever they felt like it is suddenly locked, they realize they no longer hold control. They can no longer re-enter without accountability. That's when the messages come. That's when the guilt starts. That's when they want to talk. But here's the truth. I didn't do any of this to get them back. I did it to get me back, because the old version of me would have taken the call, had the conversation, explained the boundaries, given them one more chance. This version, she's done. Not bitter, not angry, just done. Because healing isn't about closure from them. It's about closing the door yourself, gently, firmly, without slamming, and walking away without leaving it open a crack. And once you make disrespect uncomfortable, you start attracting people who wouldn't even think of testing your worth in the first place. That's how everything changed. This is the part no one wants to talk about, the silence, the empty space, the uncomfortable truth that healing sometimes looks like disappearing. Not to punish, not to manipulate, but to finally choose peace. For a long time, I thought letting someone miss me meant stepping back just enough so they'd chase. I thought it meant posting a pretty picture, staying mysteriously unavailable, pretending I was okay while secretly watching to see if they noticed. But that's not detachment. That's a performance. That's a silent form of begging. Letting someone miss you for real means vanishing without the intent to return. It means removing your presence so fully that they have to feel the weight of your absence, not because you want them to suffer, but because you finally stopped suffering just to stay visible to them. That was my turning point. I had been too available for too long, too reachable, too emotionally open to someone who was emotionally closed. And the moment I pulled back, really pulled back, I had to face the part of myself that was terrified they'd never come back. That fear had been driving me the entire time. I wasn't holding on because they were loving. I was holding on because I was afraid I'd be forgotten. I believed that silence meant abandonment. That distance meant I didn't matter. But here's the truth that set me free. People don't forget what is real, they only forget what was convenient. So I got quiet. I didn't send the "I miss you" text. I didn't reply to their vague attempts to check in. I didn't watch their stories. I didn't post to make them curious. I simply focused on building a life where they no longer fit, and that life, it became beautiful. It didn't happen overnight. The first few days were hard. I'd check my phone instinctively. I'd have to physically stop myself from reaching out. But each time I resisted, I grew stronger. See, when you finally detach from someone you used to obsess over, you get your power back piece by piece. You start noticing how much energy you were leaking trying to keep their attention. You realize how deeply your worth had been tied to their reaction. And when that connection fades, something magical happens. You stop needing them to miss you because you no longer miss the version of you that needed them. I learned that letting someone miss you is not about withholding love. It's about withholding access. And there's a difference. Love can remain. Compassion can remain. But the privilege of access to you, your time, your emotions, your energy, that must be earned. And once someone has shown you they'll take your presence for granted, they have to learn how to live with your absence. That's the consequence of breaking connection. Not because you're punishing them, but because you're protecting you. I didn't block them. I didn't delete our history. I didn't have to make a dramatic exit. I just stopped participating in a dynamic that made me feel small. I stopped being available to someone who only showed up when it was convenient for them. And I stopped needing a reaction from them to validate my decision. That silence became my closure. That absence became my clarity. Did they notice? Eventually. But by the time they reached out, something had shifted in me. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I had just moved on. Not in a loud, flashy way, in a quiet, grounded, peaceful way. And that energy is powerful. That's the energy that makes people stop and say, wait, what happened? That's the energy that makes the avoidant come back, not because you manipulated them, but because you elevated past them. But let's be honest. The real win wasn't that they came back. The real win was that I no longer wanted to return, because I had built a version of myself I was finally proud of. A version that didn't explain, didn't chase, didn't settle. A version that knew what it meant to be missed, because she knew what it meant to matter. And once you know your worth like that, you'll never beg anyone to remember it again.